Have you seen City Slickers, that kind of depiction, and how do you feel about those things?
Yeah, well, what's funny is, so I live in Parkfield, and there's a large ranch here called the V6 Ranch, and it's a dude ranch. And so they have this story where they actually watched that movie and they were like, we can do that.
Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Shul Jewish Cultural Community, and Atheist United Studios. Hey Joey, the Jewish cowboy was once a staple of American comic stereotypes. Jews were seen and largely saw themselves as highly verbal urbanites who were physically ill-suited for the gritty frontier. East Coast Jewish literary critic Leslie Fiedler even wrote that the notion of the Jewish cowboy is utterly ridiculous. But Jews have had a long history of riding horses, trading cattle, and rustic living, reaching back to Central Europe and continuing in the real-life American Wild West.
We're delighted to talk with artist Katie Herzog, a current Jewish ranch owner and descendant of German Jewish cattle traders who established a ranch in California's Salinas Valley over 150 years ago that is still in production today. Her artwork is found in numerous collections, including the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Thomas J. Dodd Research Center at the University of Connecticut, and the Tom of Finland Foundation. She's been written about in publications such as the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Huffington Post, the Advocate, and TSQ, Transgender Studies Quarterly. Katie, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the podcast and I'm really pleased to be here.
So your family history is really interesting. They came to San Francisco from Germany during the Gold Rush and became the first Jewish ranch owners in Monterey County. Could you tell us a little more about them?
So they were involved in Butchertown in San Francisco, and where they were selling beef, and also were butchers and a kosher butcher, and ended up buying a ranch in southern Monterey County to raise cattle. There's a train that went from southern Monterey County up to San Francisco. So that's sort of where that all started. And then my family, it's just been in my family ever since. So for over 150 years, ranching and farming. And then part of the family now still runs cattle and uses the same brand that originally was actually a rectangle, but then evolved into a square. So that's the brand that they use now. So as a painter and a conceptual artist, I love the fact that our family brand is a square. So I'm making a lot of work about that now. It's really fun to research the history.
Speaking of Jews running cattle and kind of the popular conception of such things, have you seen City Slickers and that kind of depiction, and how do you feel about those things?
Yeah, well, what's funny is, so I live in Parkfield, and there's a large ranch here called the V6 Ranch, and it's a dude ranch. And so they have this story where they actually watched that movie and they were like, we can do that. And so they have a business where people come and move cattle from one side of the ranch to the other. And that's the majority of their livelihood, I think, at this point. And so that narrative of City Slicker is very present in my current sort of location. So yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that movie since it first came out, but I love it. I should watch it again for sure.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe.
You know, cattle trading was a common line of work for Jews in rural Germany, in part because Jews weren't allowed to own their own farmland. So one outgrowth of this was the development of Lakodish, the Jewish cattle trading language or jargon, which you explore in some of your work. What was the purpose of that in-group dialect?
Yeah, it was exactly that. It was an insider trading kind of lingo that was Hebrew-based, and as far as I understand, only spoken by men, and is a dead language. It's I think categorized as a jargon because there were like, I don't know, maybe 400 words or something, but now, nobody speaks it, but there are audio files available. You can hear it online on Yaron Mattress's website, who is a linguist and a scholar who is pretty much the source of all of my knowledge of this. So there were people who were not Jewish, boys who were sort of helping out back in the day and kind of picked up some of the language. So those are the people who then were recorded, and those files are available online if you want to listen.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the socioeconomics of Jewish cattle trading and where the Kodesh fits into it?
The cattle traders were just trading cattle, and so they wouldn't really be ranchers. And so those are, so it would be more like associated with like the vocation of like of merchants, but they're also providing a really vital service for farmers and ranchers in rural Germany. And so they actually had a really kind of close relationship with them. And so they were, I've read that they were some of the last people to be affected by Nazis because of their close ties with the rural communities and the farmers and things like that. So that was interesting to me. There's actually a painting that is not going to be in the show, but that was in. I had work in the Mexicali Biennial recently, which was in the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. The show is called The Land of Milk and Honey, and I made a painting that was also had an NFT that went with it. So the oil painting was hanging in the museum, and then it had a QR code on the wall text, and then that took you to the NFT, which was a sort of a kind of just a picture of the painting in my studio pretty much. And then the sale of that NFT would initiate an actual transfer of beef. So the NFT hasn't sold yet, but if it does, there will be an entire cow that from Reverie Ranch that will be butchered and donated to a local nonprofit called Lumina Alliance. So that's another way that I'm kind of conceptually engaging like the language and the cattle trade in the work itself. And then the painting has Hebrew stencils, but then also branding irons that spell out the NFT blockchain. So it's, I think, 32 numbers and letters. So it looks like 32 numbers and letters that are all branding irons. And so that's what the painting looks like. So I'm probably still going to continue to kind of work in that way where I'm like engaging digital realms and sort of economies and like actual like land management strategies and stuff like that. So I love painting, and that is my number one thing that I do. And I also enjoy bringing in these other ways of sort of contextualizing painting and adding meaning.
Speaking of branding irons, I know a number of decades ago there was a publication that included several Jewish ranching branding irons in it, and it was about Jewish pioneers in the West. And this was very surprising to other Jewish historians in America who really weren't aware of that phenomenon. And you mentioned that your family had their own, and I think it was represented in the book as well. In terms of like an artist looking at these particular branding objects and also knowing that they're Jewish and they represent this rich history, how do you kind of incorporate that into your work beyond the blockchain and that kind of thing? Is there something special about the branding iron itself as an object?
Yeah, I think for me personally, in my I relate it to ideas around copyright and knowledge production and library work in a way. I love the fact that it's an image, it's a symbol. The actual physical act of branding is really intense. I know the Monterey County brand inspector, Connie Duncan. I actually bought a goat from her for my daughter's 4-H project for the Salinas Valley Fair last year. That's how I met her. And so I did a painting of her truck that says brand inspector. And so I sort of also kind of just incorporate sort of like day-to-day experiences around the county and branding and logos and people and stuff like that. On another note, I'm also interested in learning and thinking about like Judaism itself and how there's been the history of the binary between like an agrarian like life and an intellectual life, or, text and land. I mean, that is like this really inherent conversation that I'm really interested in kind of being a part of and learning more about. My personal experience is that those two are not mutually exclusive, and they're not separate endeavors. And it's so I'm interested in sort of, just like thinking about that within like Judaism itself.
As you mentioned, you live and work on a ranch in Parkfield, California, where road signs say the population is 18. Are there really only 18 residents there? And how does living in such a sparsely populated place affect your artistic process?
Yes, there are 18, but like including all the people that kind of, I think, identify as a Parkfield resident are probably closer to like maybe 70 or something like that. 70, I don't know. I'm not sure. But it is rural. There are way more cows than there are people out here for sure. So it has just completely changed a lot for me. One thing that comes to mind is that people who live elsewhere kind of associate rural life with lack of people, lack of services, lack of a grocery store. And my experience living here is that my like understanding of what constitutes a thing has changed. So I have like this really deep sort of knowledge and relationship with the landscape and with animals. And so, I did move here from LA. So it took years for my brain to shift. For the show at Yankee Candle in 2020, I did some work around the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And that was like, I don't know if you remember the Bundys and Cliven and Eamon Bundy and like that whole situation. And so that's sort of like where I started, where like ranching and beef and like the narrative started to like enter my work. And so I actually went there to the wildlife refuge and made a rubbing of the sign. And that was in the show, the symbols of like masculinity and like, manifest destiny and all of these things are things that I'm interested in working with, especially like, incorporating the Richard Prince book pages, and that's all about creation. And so I'm interested in making comparisons between like Lukodesh and this idea of like appropriated language and appropriated visual language and sort of bringing those together.
In terms of the subject matter of your work, I'm assuming that the landscape and other things would determine much of the nature, the subjects of your pieces, and maybe it shifted from what it used to be in LA.
So I was really interested in research and in information economies and copyright. And I did go to library school, and I've worked in public libraries for decades. And so that was something that played into the work. Gender and sexuality were issues that played into the work. So I feel like there were things that I was already doing that kind of led me to this particular series. So I moved to this ranch, and then I discovered that my ancestors spoke Lukodesh, and then I was really inspired by that. And so then I have since been basing all my work on it, but it's definitely like a product of a trajectory that had to do with language in a different kind of way. And also like when I, first moved to Parkfield, like all I could think about was like was the cowboy, the aesthetic life of the cowboy, and the representations of cowboys and like my identity as a woman, as a Jew, as a queer person, and like how I fit in here, and another thing that's interesting is that, the people who are here, they are like real cowboys. Like everyone's actually, that's their job. Like it's not about the aesthetic, although that is something that is helpful in running their, operation in terms of their dude ranch. It's something that I just love thinking about.
Looking through the photo gallery on your website, I was struck by your painting of the McDonald's Beyond Beef PLT clamshell. Given your history in the ranching business, I'm wondering why you chose that image as the subject of your painting.
Yeah, so that was made for a show called Yankee Candle at Cloud and Man in January 2020. So just to kind of give a little bit of a context of like what was going on in the world, when I made that I think in 2019, and so McDonald's was just experimenting with the marketing of that, and that was only sold in Canada at that point. So it was Beyond Beef, Beyond Meat. They were kind of testing out the market, which I think they're still doing, but I think they're doing it now in the United States. I have not tried one yet. But I was really fascinated by the idea of just symbolically what it means for McDonald's to have that as a product. And the relationship to like simulacra, like the idea of like a fake burger or something that is beyond meat, and then just like the amount of sort of power the McDonald's hamburger has. So I made this painting that was extremely minimal, and it was like almost like a failure of a painting. Like it looked sort of so flimsy. Like it was kind of gestural, like it was just the golden arches, and then it was a little leaf sort of, and then I just left the linen just as is, because the clamshell, which is like the packaging for the burger, was just paper, because it was sort of trying to kind of like give this idea of like natural kind of messaging or something, I think, that with their marketing. So I was also kind of interested in this idea of like of just this like flimsy failure of a painting, and it played a role in relationship to the rest of the work in the show, which was like kind of like a puzzle, like puzzle pieces that kind of like informed each other and that kind of thing.
Do you have strong opinions about alternatives to dairy and meat and that kind of stuff?
I honestly was only interested intellectually. I don't care. I have like no opinion on that, really. I really don't. I was interested in like aesthetics and the symbolic nature of the PLT.
Much of your work deals with familiar figures and objects, like your 1-hour computer paintings, which are basically still life paintings of a computer, and your George W. Bush shower painting that appeared in LA Times. In your view, what is the role of fine art in the broader culture?
I can speak to my culture that I exist in now, which fine art plays a role at the county fair and at the Cattlewomen's Western Art Show. So when I was in LA, I showed a lot. I mean, I showed for over a decade. My work was represented by a commercial gallery, and then I came out here and I was, showing at the county fair and doing other things, and I felt like I just really wanted to be in both worlds. Like I wanted my work to be validated by the like art world, and then recently had a really generative conversation, and which totally just changed the way I was thinking about it. So I just really I think it's important to sort of hold all the different art worlds and cultures in equal standing, I'll say.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think when we put things into categories like fine art or illustration art or whatever the different boxes are, the borders are so porous anyway that, I think the success of fine art, if we're still using that term, is when it is able to reach people at a fair, or, you're flipping through a magazine and something strikes you. These silos that some kinds of art tend to be put into, I think is a disservice, like you're saying, to everyone.
And also, I think that when it comes down to it, the majority of like culture is experienced online and with moving pictures. And that's extremely valid. And I don't think that there should be some sort of like hierarchy in terms of work that might be in the form of a painting versus work that might be in the form of an Instagram or something like that.
You're obviously very committed to the land and the community where you live. I read that you started a rural Girl Scout troop there. What has that been like?
The Girl Scout troop has been fun. So I was not a Girl Scout growing up. And so it's been a learning curve for me just to figure out the workings of like the Girl Scouts. But I'm really just doing fun stuff, and it's been great. It's a multi-age troop. We don't have a whole bunch of kids out here. I mean, my kids, I have 2 kids in there in a 1-room schoolhouse, a public school. That's the whole entire school is 10 kids, kindergarten through 6th grade. So I had to make it a multi-age troop. So it's like pretty much 1st grade up through, senior high school. But in Parkfield, the kids are really used to the multi-age kind of like learning. And so it's really, it's helpful for everybody. And it's actually really, really wonderful to watch them sort of work together. But I try to get the community involved. So people will volunteer to do like a jam making workshop, or, a lot of people who live in rural environments, have a lot of skills because you sort of have to out here. So there's a lot of that skill sharing kind of stuff with the girls, which is fun. And we do camping trips and all that stuff. So it's funny though, because when I first when I first decided I was going to do it, my family was like, they let you be a Girl Scout troop leader? Like they couldn't believe it, and I sort of feel that way too. I'm kind of like, but it's been great. Yeah, it's been really fun.
Do you do arts with the kids also?
Yeah, so actually Parkfield Elementary came and did a studio visit recently, and it was really fun. And I taught them how to stretch canvas, and I'm using Hebrew stencils in my paintings, so you can see behind me. So all the kids got a stencil and then, made a painting with it, and did collage with, pictures of cowboys and stuff. And so it was really fun. So yeah, I do love working with kids and doing art and stuff like that.
You've got a new solo exhibition opening on January 12th at the Monterey Museum of Art, featuring a series of paintings inspired by Lakota and your family's history in Monterey County. Could you describe some of the pieces you've included?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of them are behind me, but people listening to the podcast won't see them. So they're, I work in a big sort of metal shop, and there's a hoist, and I have an old saddle that's hanging on the hoist. And so I'm doing paintings. I started off doing paintings of this saddle hung on this hoist, which has sort of a drama to it. There's a lot of weight. And so for me, that was sort of like hanging a saddle and then painting that was sort of was kind of being a way to engage the saddle as a trope and to kind of examine it. That's where I started. And then I'm incorporating Hebrew with stencils to kind of talk about the materiality of language, and I'm layering things. And then I also have a couple of really large paintings of bulls that belong to my friend Allison. Then I also have a series of paintings with collage elements from a book. They're actual book pages from a book called Richard Prince Cowboy. So it's Richard Prince's Cowboy series. And I ripped up the book and sort of glued them to canvas and then painted over them, and those are in welded T-post frames. So that's what the show is going to consist of, and it's in the Currents Gallery at the Monterey Museum of Art. So yeah, I'm really excited about it. And also, there's a real lack of understanding of Jews in agriculture and the history of Jews in agriculture. So I'm really hoping that this show, because it's local, I'm hoping it kind of can provide some local history for people about Jews in agriculture. So that's my hope.
And I happen to know there's going to be an exhibition catalog. Will that be available in PDF online, or is it only to people who visit the exhibit?
They're going to sell it at the museum, and I don't know if anyone wants a copy, just drop me a line and I'll mail one to you. Yeah, I'm really excited about the catalog and the show. So yeah, I hope everyone comes. It's January 12th through March 17th, and there's a reception on Friday, January 12th from 5 to 7 if you're in the area.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Katie, for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely speaking with you.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.